The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest today is Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and certainly no stranger to this program. Alex, welcome. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, David. Last time I was on the show, I had to talk to the other David.
That's right. And that has to do with Rogers' policy that when someone is running for office in your family, you can't be on air, and that's fair. So that's
congratulations to Carol on her re-election.
Thank you. It's been an interesting time, to be sure. I could probably do a whole show on municipal elections, but unfortunately, that'll have to wait for a while, like about 4 years. Anyway, you know all about elections. Actually, that reminds me that one of your former campaign managers was also elected, Melanie Middleborough.
Yeah, she was. I was not shocked in the least to see Melanie have a successful run, and I think she'll do great things for the Owen Sound City Council.
Yes, and she will have a good learning curve about municipal politics, to be sure. Well, since we talked last, your party has elected a new leader, Mr. Poilievre, and I won't use the word coronation because that's not quite the case, but it was a very overwhelming vote. He had a huge amount of support when the ballots were counted.
He did. In fact, I was proven wrong the last time I was on this show with Mr. Carr. He asked me if Mr. Poilievre would win on the first ballot, and I said, no, I don't think he will. And he obviously did. So look, I didn't misread. I just wasn't following it. I wasn't involved in this leadership race. I chose to stay out of it. So I wasn't as involved or tracking the day-to-day polls, but and sort of internal to the party. But kudos, congratulations to all the candidates. I mean, it doesn't matter where you finished on the race. I think they all, putting your name forward, especially for something to lead a national level party, is even a bigger commitment and a bigger sacrifice that you need to make. And so kudos to all of the candidates that ran. But Mr. Poilievre obviously shows how unified the Conservative Party of Canada is, rallying behind him. And now he's hit the ground running, and I'm sure we'll be prepared for whenever the next federal election is.
Yes, I guess that will be I won't say the $64,000 question, but that'll be, it could be could be 2025, but with our system of government, it could be sooner. You just never know.
Absolutely right.
Now, Mr. Poilievre has a shadow cabinet. And that includes people like the whips and the government house leader and so on. Sort of like and there's a leadership team that responds to government business and does tries to keep the feet to the government to the fire. But he has a shadow cabinet, and there was some discussion in the media that it seemed to be larger than usual. Is that the case?
I don't think so. If you compare it to when Mr. Scheer was the leader in my first election, I think he even had more when you count all the deputy shadow ministers and the associate deputy or associate shadow ministers. So the media did run, I think, a story or two on it, more Ottawa-centric, not really on the national scale. But ultimately, none of it matters. Unlike when you're in government and you're making additional ministers or additional cabinet ministers, they all come with perks. There is no perk to be named a shadow minister, a deputy shadow minister, or an associate shadow minister, because there is no extra money. It doesn't cost the taxpayer anything more. It just gives more responsibility to those individual MPs to do their primary job of holding the government to account. And so it's a great way to keep the whole team even busier and focused on making sure the government's doing everything that they are elected to do, which is to best represent and bring forth the best legislation for all Canadians and not just certain demographics or certain parts of the country.
Now, those people who are members of the shadow cabinet have obviously a primary responsibility, but the associates also do, and can they take the place of the shadow minister in, say, a committee hearing?
Yeah, but that's not the way it works. Any of us can replace, especially our party. Every single one of us is tabled as an associate member, I believe is the right term, of every committee. So we constantly, I've subbed into countless committees in the last couple months even. I sat in on science and industry just a little while ago. It was fascinating. We're actually talking about small modular reactors, obviously something that impacts Bruce Power in our backyard and the whole nuclear industry, and the best way actually to deal, in my opinion, on climate change and moving forward to make ourselves carbon neutral as quickly as possible. So you can sub in on any committee. They normally split the load up. So we have different sort of sectors. Another good example, Brad Redikoff's I think our deputy shadow minister for immigration. He really led the charge at one of the latest committees. I subbed in immigration just a couple weeks ago now. And it was during a review of a current report that's being done, but because of different conflicts and commitments that lots of MPs have, travel, etc., they needed somebody else in there. But Brad really ran the show on that as the deputy, because it depends on the issue. So the smart teams really try to break the workload down and work together to come up with you take this lead on this sort of issue or this angle, and it really just makes everybody work together and more efficiently.
Sure. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that you're still in a hybrid session of the House. Is that correct?
Yes, we are. That got approved till actually all the way till June of next year. And so they're doing that. Now, that being said, you'll see very few Conservative MPs participating in the House other than in person. Committee's a little bit different, especially with committees still sitting on Fridays because of the hybrid sort of setup. A lot of MPs, especially those that live right across the country, try to get, some of them will try to travel on Thursday night or Friday morning, so some of them will participate virtually. However, we are definitely still set up in a hybrid format. There's ongoing discussions at PROC, the Standing Committee on Procedural Affairs, where they're discussing what does this look like for the House of Commons into the future, and there's lots of discussions going on amongst all the parties on what are the advantages, disadvantages, and where do we want to be down the road.
Yeah, because it's a cultural shift for the House, because you are. I happened to be watching some of the videos, and I know that there was a quorum, which is not all. Not everyone is there, but our hybrid members or those who are conversing as we are, they're counted for quorum as well. But they may not be in the House, and you may not see them on video.
Well, you can't see them on video unless they're speaking. However, that is something we've gone through a few times in the last year, that when there is a quorum call, traditionally it's 15 members of the House must be present for a quorum call. It's actually changed, if I got my numbers correct, it's 5 right now. You only need 5 members out of 337 that are currently members of Parliament. We're still waiting on that by-election that's happening here in a few weeks down in Mississauga area to be full House once again. However, so it's only 5, but you do have to have your camera on. If you're logged in virtually, you don't have your camera on, you're not in the House. So constantly when you see those quorum calls happen, people, if you're physically in the chamber, you'll see people pouring into the lobbies and into the chamber very quickly to make sure that they can be accounted for, that debate does not collapse, because that's the real reason you need quorum. If there's not enough people participating, then why are we even bothering having the discussion and the debate? So they want to make sure there's a very minimal number, 5. You'd expect 5 people, but to be frank, I've been in the House, and now it's different for adjournment proceeding, late shows, but I've been in the House where it's me, the parliamentary secretary answering my question, and the speaker. That's it. It's a pretty empty room, and there's just 3 of us in there talking.
How's the echo when it's empty?
Oh, it's all right. It's actually a lot less, people speaking in the background. It's very easy to have but there's no echo. It's actually well set up that way. It's I'm not too worried. Normally when I'm speaking, I put my ex-military voice on, and I speak loud enough that normally people do pay attention, and they can hear me speak, but at the same time, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Make the RSM proud. Well, you mentioned the by-election coming up in Mississauga Lakeshore, and I noticed that Charles Sousa, who is a former cabinet minister in the Wynne government, is running, but there is a obviously conservative candidate and an NDP candidate. Traditionally, or if the traditional logic follows, between the general elections, by-elections tend to go to the opposition. And, I'm not going to ask you to predict anything, but do you think there's a good chance of there being a good discussion in this by-election?
Oh, I think so. I think that's why, I disagree with your assertion that they normally go to the opposition. I definitely think the opposition's chances of being successful in some of these tighter ridings, bellwether ridings. Mississauga Lakeshore is not necessarily a bellwether riding, but it is held provincially by the Ontario PC government. So it's one that we definitely have our eyes on. I think we're running a great candidate. Ron, I can't pronounce his last name here. I don't have it in front of me. Schisner or something like that. Yep. He's a police officer in that area. Seems like a very competent, capable individual. I've never met him. I'm hoping to potentially be able to slip down there on a weekend between now and the by-election to help out if I can, because ultimately everybody should be helping out if you care about the team. So ideally, myself, I'll try to get down there and at least do what I can to give him a hand. I think it'll be a close race, but who knows? It's traditionally, it's only been held federally for, I think, 4 years from 2011 to 2015 in the last 40 by the Conservatives. Otherwise, the Liberals have held it for 40 plus years. So, we got to be realistic, but at the same time, it'll send a signal if we are successful in that by-election. I have a feeling it'll send a very clear signal to the current Trudeau government.
Well, what's interesting is that I used to live in that riding. I grew up in that riding. I'm as old as dirt, but I grew up in that riding. And one of the things that's really interesting is that the federal MP in the 80s, 70s, and 80s was a guy by the name of Don Blencarn. And he had an arm lock on that riding for, I'm going to say, close to 20 years. And so it's got a long, long history of, I think, of supporting the Conservatives. And I'm going to say at some point, he was one of the rare Conservatives in the House. There was one back in the 70s and 80s, there was one period when the Conservatives were reduced to a very small number, and that was when he was one of the few GTA MPs, which was quite interesting. But he was also very well liked. He did good work, and he was a good constituency MP. In fact, and this is where it gets really weird, I met the woman who was his on his constituency staff for many years. She lived up here in Owen Sound. And we had quite the conversation when we met, but very, very interesting. So who knows? Who knows? It will all depend, won't it? And you mentioned that you're going to go down to the riding to do a little work. That's one of the things that is not uncommon in by-elections. I recall many years ago talking to a Conservative MP in New Brunswick, and there was a by-election, and he was from my side of the province, the west side, but he was over there on the east side of the province like a dirty shirt, campaigning and supporting the team. So you'll have to tell us how the by-election went next time we talked. So look forward to that one.
No problem.
Alex, you in the House, you raised the question of the ArriveCan app. And I'll be honest with you, I was not impressed with the response from the government. Basically, you raised some very legitimate points about the ArriveCan app, which is now no longer in use, I believe. But I thought the minister was rather, he basically gave an anecdotal response to your serious question. It was just not on, I thought.
Look, the first time I raised this, David, was June of 2021. And so ArriveCan's still around. It's not, it's optional now. It's just no longer mandatory. But the question, I raised this for the first time. I didn't call it ArriveCan back in June of 2021 when I asked it. I was just speaking about these requirements that the government's brought in that mandate that you need to have an internet or an email or access, therefore, or a smartphone to travel or to cross the border or do anything. And as you well know, our riding is one of the oldest demographic ridings in Ontario. We don't have reliable broadband or internet. We have lots of people that don't have access to the appropriate technology or even comfortable using it. And at the time when they had gone out, if they traveled, at the time they required to have proof of vaccination. These are people that met all the requirements and would have a hard copy of it present. And the fact that they were being, in some cases, fined for failing to use a digital app is beyond me. And I've spoke up as well for other even minority groups in the riding, like the Amish, for example, who now have multiple fines for multiple reasons, not just the lack of using the ArriveCan, but again, how have they been notified? How are they even supposed to be aware when everything that the government put out would update a website and say, here, go read our website. Well, these people don't have websites. They don't have telephones. They don't have internet. And there's lots of Canadians, even myself, as the member of parliament, I knew how difficult it was for me and my staff to try to understand the changes in the rules on a daily basis. So it's just very frustrating that they somehow thought it was acceptable to discriminate against basically digitally illiterate or digitally challenged Canadians, that in particular seniors and those minority groups that don't have access to reliable internet or email and just are producing everything that's required by them by law to travel or to come back into Canada, and sometimes getting fined because of it. And again, just go to the Amish. They had no problems throughout the whole pandemic. Most of them are dual citizens to travel when they had to for family, compassionate reasons, et cetera, to go down to the United States. And it wasn't until they got back to Canada to try to return to their own country that they ran into some problematic issues. And it's very frustrating. Because this is something that for over a year and a half I've been flagging this, and they didn't seem to be interested at all in considering the impact that the mandatory use of a digital app was having on so many Canadians.
Did the Amish community actually get their situation resolved?
No, not yet. As I said,
CDSA just didn't even allow them to come back into Canada?
No, they have to allow them back into Canada, but they've been fined. So as I've said in the House, I don't have the exact number. I'm working on that with them, but I believe if just based on the sheer number of tickets that I've seen from them, and a lot of them are still ongoing resolution. Some of them have, very few of them I think have paid for them tickets at all because but they don't like fighting things. They're not a very, they're more of a pacifist, community. They're plain people, as they say themselves, but I believe it's over $250,000 in fines. I know some individual Amish now that are facing $40,000 plus in fines. They have liens against their property because the courts have sent it to collection agencies to collect these fines, and it's just making a big mess for them to try to carry on and live their lives, which they very much don't try to interfere with anybody else. They try to live a very peaceful, I'd argue isolated living within their own community, and they just they do their bit. They pay their taxes. They do everything. They don't vote though. So I mean, it's like I wish they'd vote some days because I figure it would help. But my point is they shouldn't be discounted just because they're not as involved or they don't understand the rules. So I'm not letting this one go. I'm going to continue to fight for them and others that I feel have been unjustly targeted by policies that don't pass the common sense test. And as you see, the other issues going on with the ArriveCan, and I was happy to see the other opposition parties support us. We raised a motion in the House just this past month asking the Auditor General to do a complete audit of the ArriveCan app, because now that the numbers have come out, it costs the Canadian taxpayers over $54 million. for something that it was demonstrated could have been produced for $250,000 in a weekend. And there's millions of dollars that they said when it was asked, well, who got the money? They said, well, here, $1 million plus went to this one company, and the company came out publicly and said, we didn't see a single penny. So it's questioning how the government's managing the taxpayers' dollars and cents when they don't even know where millions of dollars have gone. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm optimistic the Auditor General will look into this and we can get to the bottom of where these millions of dollars have been spent. And basically the line that I know we were using now is who got rich, because it wasn't the Canadian taxpayer.
Good point. I've been in some online forums where people who do know programming are just shaking their heads and saying, hey, this isn't rocket science. It's a relatively simple app. It could easily have been built by and properly built by competent people. The 54 million? Really? So, well, that's one of the things we'll just keep an eye on. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out, because, oh well, it's only taxpayers' money, unfortunately. And they mean that sarcastically. Well, Alex, let's switch things up a little bit. We're 4 days post Remembrance Day as we record this. Were you able to be back in the constituency for Remembrance Day?
No, absolutely. I got back there last week. I was back. The last whole week was a constituency week last week, so I was able to make it back on the Sunday in time to attend a great little service in Holstein. The weather's always been great there. I've been back, I think, 2 out of the 3 years for that Sunday service, and what a beautiful day it was on the Sunday as well. And but a great little service they run in Holstein. And then there was lots of events going on, not so much tied directly to Remembrance Day. I did get to speak at a few schools this past week. One specifically more of a civics class to a grade 10s class up in Lions Head. Got over to Port Elgin, which is technically Ben Lobb's riding, but got invited over there to speak more about the military and Remembrance Day and what it means. So I was doing that as well. I stopped at Aaron Terra Public School as well. That was just drop off some backpacks for some kids through a program that TELUS actually supports, so that those kids in need gives the school some options. So I'll rotate that, or hopefully TELUS will keep doing that every year. And it's something that I can, give different schools a few backpacks fully loaded with supplies. And then the other thing that really happened even before Remembrance Day that I was really impressed with, it's too bad, I wish more people would have came out, but I think it interfered with the attack game and a few things. But at the Owen Sound Legion, there was the Soldier's Letter, a wonderful play put together by Jana and Lindsay Lewis, if I got their names right. Jana basically did almost all of it herself, but the two of them produced a book a few years ago. I think in 2019 it was published, called A Soldier's Letter, and some beautiful poetry and that I think Lindsay did most of. Jana did all the pictures. They put it together, but they actually did a really good job of reaching out. They had some very famous actors, Canadians, that read different portions of the poems that all contributed to it. So it was a combination video. It had some local people, veterans, get up and read parts of it. Miriam Kepke as well from the Owen Sound City Council. She read one of the poems. And Dave Ward, I really give credits, not only to everybody that participate, but I'd really like to draw special attention to Dave Ward, who's a veteran who spoke about, he had the final sort of, major role in the production, and did one of the longest poems, very short poem, but he spoke himself of his own struggles with PTSD, and he's a survivor of an attempted suicide, and it was pretty heart-wrenching. And at the same time, I knew his story from when I met him earlier this year doing that Ruck to Remember March. He was providing the logistics support as people were, they were raising money for the Joe Sweeney Fund with the Ontario Legion and end homelessness with veterans. So it was something that I met Dave and knew his story that he shared with me back in earlier this year. However, his willingness to speak openly about his challenges and how difficult it is for some veterans coming back from conflict was pretty touching. And the other person was Carol Mitchell, who was Corporal Jim Mitchell's mother, who was the soldier killed October 3rd, 2006 in Afghanistan. And it was the first time I'd heard Carol speak for as long as she did about the whole story and a lot more background on Jim. And I've known them very well for the last number of years and got to spend time with them, but it was the first time I heard it all in sort of one go. And there wasn't a single person that I don't think didn't have tears going down their eyes and down their face, and that were totally just encompassed with what Carol and the story she was telling. So I think ultimately, even though the play, the whole production covered from the start, from World War I right up to present day, the whole key thing that any of us can do, any Canadians can do, is always remember, lest we forget, and make sure we remember those that made the ultimate sacrifice. And I think it always means that much more, and it's a lot easier to remember when you have those personal connections. You've heard those personal stories. So that was the Wednesday night prior to Remembrance Day. And then Remembrance Day, I was down to the Veterans Breakfast in Hanover, and then back to Tara, my hometown, where I've been a member of that Ranch 383 since before I joined the military. So it's somewhere I've maybe missed 5 or 6 ceremonies in 30 years, and I will always be in Tara. I know it maybe, the rest of the riding gets to fight over me for other events the rest of the year, but I am committed to being in Tara. It's where my heart is. And as I've mentioned publicly countless times, Remembrance Day is the most important day of the year for myself. I lost 6 of my own soldiers April 8th of 2007, and it's just a way to pay tribute to them and my hometown, and it's just where I need to be. And it'll be hard pressed to never for people not to see me in Tara. It'll take a pretty large catastrophe to make it so I'm not there.
I noticed it this year at Owen Sound, and I was part of the platform party at Owen Sound, that first of all, there was obviously a large number of people, but the number of young people, children from schools, that's not something I've seen pre-COVID, because it's not a holiday, but teachers had brought their students down from Hillcrest and I think St. Mary's, or it could have been Eastridge. But the point was there were a significant number of students present, and that was a big change. And I'm personally glad to see that, because that's how the story gets told when it gets passed on to the next generation.
Great turnout right across the riding. I saw some of the photography and photos and the social media from Owen Sound. Very impressive crowd. I think it didn't hurt to have great weather. That was by far the nicest Remembrance Day that I've had that I can remember in years. It was great in Tara as well. We had, hundreds out to schools. I think all the kids grade 5 to grade 8 from the Aaron Tara Elementary School were there. And it's something I remember back. I know Tara's always done it, is the school's always participated and come down at 11 o'clock for the service. So it's you're 100% correct. I'll continue to encourage all schools that if they're located close enough to get a portion of their student body down to the actual cenotaph and the ceremony, I think it means that much more than even doing an assembly at 11 o'clock in the gymnasiums. I think seeing in person and getting to see some of the veterans and the older people out there. I got to meet Joe Leggett down in Hanover, who I'd never met before, and we served in the same regiment. A bit before my time, I think he was in 62 to 75, so not a war veteran from World War II or Korea, but still not a young man anymore. And it was just a really great opportunity, and to see him and to talk to him and interact with people that have actually lived in the military. I think we need to do more of it.
Indeed. And there's a lot of history here in Grey Bruce that is connected to the military, and it doesn't take a lot of work to uncover it, because in some cases it's right in front of us. It's on cenotaphs and war memorials, and it's at the Legions, and or it's at parks, because we have 2 parks named after veterans, Jervis Bay and Mitchell Park here in the city, as well as others. So lots of opportunity if you have the interest. Well, Alex, we're going to take a quick break, and we are going to come back in about 90 seconds, thereabouts, and we'll have further conversation. Friends, I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Heartbeat of Mother Earth, I feel you and embrace your warmth. I see you dancing through the trees. Your song floats on the summer breeze. Community, we come together. We are the voice of our ancestors. Thankful for how much you bless us. Feel the thunder in the drum. All our voices sing as one. Feel the power, feel the pride. Feel the drumbeat deep inside. Feel the boom, feel the bass. Let's let go of time and space. It'll make you dance, it'll make you sing. Ode Wegun, Wedok Wishin. The drum will lead you, take you far. Always remember who you are.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. My guest is Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Alex, welcome back.
It's great to be back, David.
Now, Alex, I have to say, just as a sort of an off comment for about Remembrance Day, I have never, ever seen such a warm day in 40 years or more years of doing those Remembrance Day services. It's always been cold or wet and snowing, and I've always admired the stoicism of the veterans on parade, but boy, a light top coat was all I needed to wear this year. Remarkable.
No, it was by far the nicest day I can remember in a long time, too. We've had some nice days. It's normally not too bad if it's at least sunny out and the wind's down, but I know the wind and the rain can make it miserable. But it was great to see, especially considering the challenges we've had over the last couple of years with the pandemic and with the restrictions. So I think it was just really fortunate for everybody to be able to get that sort of sense of remembrance out there with large numbers, especially considering everything over the last couple of years. So thankful to the weather gods for making everything nice on Friday. As I joke around with our MPP all the time, if the weather's nice, it was the day the federal government or the federal representatives responsible, and for the days that it's bad weather, blame it on the province.
That says so much about this country, doesn't it, Alex?
It says a little bit.
So much. Anyway, I wanted to come back to another issue that you have been talking about in committee, at least, and I believe in the House as well, and that's veterans homelessness. Now, in the municipal election campaign, homelessness was a huge issue here in this part of the country, and I think across Ontario. But you focused on veterans homelessness especially. Obviously, you've got a connection, and obviously the care of your soldiers is absolutely paramount. So tell us more.
Yeah, so when it came up in the House there a couple of weeks ago, it was actually tied to a concurrence motion from discussion that had gone on at Veterans Affairs Committee. And so what happens in a concurrence motion is 3 hours of debate to agree into that motion that came out of the committee. It's a way to get the whole House to weigh in on it and allow other people to participate. So I was very glad to see it come to the House for actual additional debate and for my chance to weigh in and to interact. I think I got 3 or 4 interactions in and draw attentions to how important it is and how complicated it is at the same time. Veteran homelessness stems from more than just lack of sort of access to resources. A lot of it's very personal. It's tied to a lot of the time mental health and post-traumatic stress, that sort of sense of almost being too prideful, of not wanting to reach out and asking for help, which is which arguably is the case in a lot of people regardless of their situation, but in particular for veterans. it adds a level of complexity to it. There's the other level is that lack of sense of belonging. A lot of people, if they serve for a number of years in the military, depending on where they grew up, how they grew up, they don't maybe have that same hometown sort of feeling that somebody like myself has with very close ties to my hometown. So they bounce around. They've been bouncing around for a military career, and then when they get out of the military, if they don't have something, it just creates the additional challenges. So I really, one of the issues that I really brought to attention in the House, and we mentioned earlier in the program today, was the great work being done by Lino and Joey. I won't mash up their last names, but they were the two gentlemen. Lino is one of the co-founders of Ruck to Remember, and every year they go out and they've been doing it for 15 years. And this year they did it from Tobermory. They did the whole Bruce Trail from Tobermory down to Niagara Falls. So obviously a large chunk of it's spent in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. They depended upon the generosity of the Legions. The Legions hosted them, fed them as they came in every night to a place to rest. And then they did the whole trail. I was fortunate enough to join them for about 11 kilometers. And wow, I'd never been on the chunks of the Bruce Trail just around Owen Sound. We have a gem that you could tell not many people are on certain stretches of that, because it looked to me like on a couple stretches that we just did from really the northwest corner of town down to Ingles Falls, a lot of people I'd be shocked if there was a half dozen people had been on it before we had this summer. You could just tell by just how little foot traffic. So I do encourage everybody to get out there and capitalize on such a great resource we have in our backyard with the Bruce Trail. But kudos to Joey and Lino, and as Ascension mentioned, Dave Ward, who was supporting them. Their goal is to raise over $500,000 this year alone for ending homelessness for veterans. Last time I checked there 2 weeks ago when I interjected in the House, they were at 287,000. So they're a little over halfway there, only a month and a bit left. So for those listeners or watchers out there, David, that feel that they can have the capacity to help out, I do encourage them to check out Ruck to Remember. Just Google that, or you can get it too, because all the funds go directly to the Owen Sound, not the Owen Sound, the Ontario Command of the Legion, to the Joe Sweeney Fund, which is dedicated and has been dedicated for years to ending homelessness for veterans.
You know, I think that's really important because I heard Barry Yates talking of who's the branch service officer for Owen Sound Branch 6, and you know, homelessness for veterans is such a huge issue, and yet the funds are not always there. And the other thing I think too is that this is not a new problem. And if I can plug a book that's well worth reading, Tim Cook, who is a chief historian at the Canadian War Museum, has written a new book called Lifesavers and Body Snatchers about the Canadian Army Medical Corps in World War I. And one of the issues was indeed homelessness for veterans because of the experiences they had been through. So maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's not a new issue. when are we going to get a grip on this? You know, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
It is, and to be frank, it's always, I think it's something that'll never go away. You'll never get it 100% perfect because there's so many challenges. It's ultimately the biggest sacrifice nations make when they are involved in conflict, and you put people in harm's way. It impacts every single one of us differently, and sometimes those injuries are physical and you can cure them very quickly. However, when it's mental or spiritual, it becomes very much a different challenge.
Yes, very true. Very true. It's a complex issue, but it's certainly one we can do more for, if nothing else. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's change things up a little bit again. And we had a financial statement from the Minister of Finance recently in the House. And so we've got, how shall I say it? On one hand, a warning of heavy weather ahead. And at the same time, recognition that there are some things that the government may or may not do.
Yeah, look, I've got a copy of it sitting here somewhere to read through every level of detail. Last week being so busy, I haven't got a chance to go through every line item. I mean, there's some good things in there that I think are, rightfully so, helping students out with some of the interest off their student loans, et cetera, and waiving that. That's what I'm good for. But at the same time, just in general, it's a lot more of the same, a lot of unnecessary spending in my viewpoint and a lot of my colleagues. You got to remember, we're dealing with 40-year high record inflation. We're dealing with, a government that has doubled our national debt since they took power. We're going to hit 1.2 trillion, I believe, next year. And the scary thing about all of that is right now we're spending, I think, just shy of 25 billion to service our national debt annually. The same amount we're putting into our Canadian Armed Forces is what we're spending just to pay the debt, the interest on the debt. Next year, that's going to almost double, where we're going to be paying as much money to service the debt because of the record high, and the interest rates increases, as we do for healthcare transfers to the provinces and territories. So I don't know about you were I'm pretty sure the average Canadian, it's hard to even get your head wrapped around 24 billion, less alone 50 billion to service the debt. And the fact of the matter is a lot of this spending has nothing to do with the pandemic. $204 billion or $205 billion, 40% of the funding, the spending over the last few years had nothing to do with the pandemic or COVID. So 40% of that funding was unnecessary in my viewpoint and not focused on the right things. So it's putting Canada in a tough spot. And again, I don't know what else to say. One of the other things that I'm a little concerned about that we're looking for in the latest statement, but I'm already hearing feedback. I think I applauded or gave the government credit earlier this year when they finally lived up to one of our longest international commitments with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission and funding our full 17 or 19 million dollars, somewhere in like that, to pay our Canada's share of the funding for that commission, sea lamprey control, research and development to take care of our Great Lakes. And the last number of years, they've been, not meeting that requirement. And lo and behold, we thought it was approved. It seemed like MPs across all parties have been advocating for this, including advocating getting it back under Global Affairs Canada, not under Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And we thought we were at least good on the funding part and but I'm just hearing since the statement came out that that funding's not even there. So I don't understand how a government that can spend as much money can't meet our 60-year plus commitment, one of our longest bilateral agreements that we have as a country with our biggest partner to the south over something as important as the Great Lakes, and yet we continue to drag our feet. So again, to me, it's always about priorities, and that's really what it comes down to, and it's really what the fundamental differences sometimes between different parties is where do you think the money should be spent? But I question when they don't spend it on what we're already committed to spending on and where we must spend money versus the nice to haves.
True. And our Great Lakes are they're the gem on our front doorstep. We really do have to take care of those of the lakes. So, well, we'll see what happens, because the financial statement itself was it was an interim, because there will be a budget coming up probably in March or April. That date I don't think has been made public yet, but what I am hearing is that there are pre-budget consultations going on, that everybody is going in for the ask, and it's the bankers and the telcos and the labor unions, and everybody's saying, okay, this is what we want to see, and we'll just wait and see how that plays out in budget. So by the next time we talk, we may have some hints.
Well, look, 100%. I mean, our big ask for the fiscal was no new tax increases, right? We've been very, very consistent in messaging that look, now's the wrong time to be increasing taxes. Obviously, my party's run for a long time on getting rid of the carbon tax, but we've even tried to pass motions just to freeze it. No more increases on a number of things. And I'll give you one specific local example, though, David. I just got an email here in the last number of weeks from one of our local small farmers, right? One of them is actually practices the most, environmentally friendly practices as a small business owner, small farmer, uses climate mitigation, no-till seeding methods, intensive rotational grazing of his ruminant animals, rest land for his bird habitats, protects the waterways on his property, minimal use of fossil fuels, maintains a native biodiverse forest. I've been out there before, uses zero chemical fertilizer, no herbicides, no fungicides, no pesticides. He went from last year having 30 to 50 customers that would order from anywhere from a $20 meat package up to a $1,500 freezer full order. Those were his typical years. This year, he's got 3 customers. He asked his customer why they're not buying the beef and lamb from him. And the answer he's got back from almost every single one, they can't afford the gas. They can't even pay their normal bills. And they're basically picking between food, utilities, or fuel bills. And so it's a good example of just something where, we see a small business that's doing everything in their power to, run an environmentally friendly business. They're local. They use the local abattoir to, get their food, their meat processed. And he's selling off a full third of his cattle herd because he just can't stay in business due to the challenges that everybody's facing due to these costs. And it's what inflation does. It's what these taxes do when you don't have them balanced properly. And again, sometimes, there's lots of things that the government has to focus on, but sometimes they need to, you got to make tough decisions on where you need to do. And putting our farmers out of business, people aren't going to like the end result. It's just going to be a vicious circle. So it's complicated. I'm not professing to say there's a silver bullet to solve any of this, but one of the things that they could be doing is making it a lot easier for our lower and middle income Canadians to just survive as we get through this, as inflation gets back under control, as the Bank of Canada continues to raise those rates and we get to where we're going. I just think a little bit of smart prudence, and I'll give the Ontario government, which I have no connection, but they've just announced, I think this week, that they're freezing their fuel taxes and keeping them off, not freezing them, keeping them exempt for another year, just in their recognition to try to keep prices down for Canadian or for Ontarians. So lots of things that I think we could do that the federal government should be doing too.
Sure, and it's tough all around. I mean, I talk to people who are facing difficulties all the time. I'm hearing from my colleagues that people are hurting. We've got seniors who are going to OSHare here and making use of food banks that they never did before. Cost of housing is astronomical if you can find a house. So we shall see what we shall see. It's not gonna be a pretty winter, I don't think.
No, it's going to be super tough for people to continue to heat their houses. And again, despite the warm weather, we know that's changing right now. And I know from early predictions from some of the weather folks that it could actually be a fairly cold winter compared to a couple that we've had recently. So it's going to make it tough for people, and seniors in particular. I mean, that was one of the questions I asked in the House, was just asking about what's the government doing for those seniors 65 to 74. They did give a 10% increase that kicked in just this summer for those senior 75 and older. But I'm hearing from so many 65 to 74 that are struggling. And so inflation hits those fixed income Canadians the hardest. And so it's one of the reasons we've been warning about it and raising the alarms over it for some time now.
To be sure, Alex. Well, let's change topic a bit and talk about firearms legislation. There was new firearms legislation introduced by the federal government this fall, I believe. And what's your thought on that?
Well, so it was introduced in June. It was Bill C-21 specifically. Now it finally came into the regulatory freeze, finally came into place, tied around handguns. And unfortunately, again, look, I've been very vocal in opposition to these, all their firearms legislation, because as I've mentioned, I don't know how many times, it doesn't focus on the right things. It's targeting the most law-abiding Canadians in the country. Statistics prove that firearms owners are 3 times less likely to commit a crime than average Canadian. And so we have some of the most restrictive firearms rules in the world already for handguns in particular. a restricted possession acquisitions license holder, so somebody that has an RPAL, that's what that stands for, i.e. are mainly handguns. There's a few firearms that aren't, but handguns are primarily why you'd have an RPAL. You're run through the CPIC, the Canadian Police Information something database or whatever. It's called every 24 hours. So if you own a restricted firearms, your name is run against the system for anything every day. And so these people take their sport and their participation in it very seriously. And it's impacting a number of them, and it's not going to do anything to actually reduce gun violence. And I think the one thing that all parties and all Canadians agree on, we need to address gun violence in this country. But predominantly, as the statistics and evidence proves, 85–90% of the gun crime committed in this country is committed via illegal handguns smuggled in from the United States. So we need to be dumping the money into dealing with that and the root causes, i.e. poverty, gangs, drugs, crime, mainly in urban centers, but it exists even in rural Canada and even in our backyard. We have lots of drug problems locally even. And so we do need to address it. So let's put more money into CBSA. Let's address some of the necessary reforms needed for our justice system. I disagree with what a lot of the current government's doing. You can understand why they're trying to do it in some ways when they're trying to address misrepresented populations within the criminal system. But the way that they're going about it doesn't make any sense because it's not actually getting to the root causes. So let's put more money into rehabilitation and helping those that have made mistakes get back on the right track. But when we have serious gun crimes and serious offenses, criminals being arrested and being let out on bail and being arrested again within weeks of being put out on bail and then arrested again. I think the record that I heard down in Toronto area, in less than 3 months, one individual was arrested 3 times for a gun offense and let out on bail every time and arrested within 2 to 3 weeks for the same problem. So obviously these are repeat offenders, people that need to be in jail until they learn, and we need to deal with that. So I just want to see them focus on the right thing. So what ended up happening this fall was that regulatory means to ban the sale of handguns in Canada. And until Bill C-21 comes into place, that regulatory means is de facto achieves the same thing.
Sure. I heard the chief of police here in Owen Sound say that the biggest 2 problems that they've got with guns is, as you said, smuggling guns across the U.S. border, but also 3D printed guns. And people can combine parts that they can buy on the internet and create basically an untraceable gun. And that is becoming a big issue as well. So we'll see where that one is not going to go away either.
No, look, the ghost guns, until again, let's go back to the root causes. Address the poverty, address the crime, address the gangs, address the drugs. Once you take away those reasons for people to commit crime, then it goes down dramatically, right? Because then you're only left with sort of the psychopaths that are, those crazy criminals out there that are getting up, get off on doing this versus those people that sometimes turn their lives to a path of crime and drugs because they don't feel like they have any better options, right? So I think that's where we need to focus, and if we do that, we'll be a lot better off. Sure.
Well, let's turn to something a little more pleasant. I want to congratulate you on your Jubilee Coin Initiative. I happened to meet one of the recipients who had been a volunteer, done a lot of volunteer work over the last few years in the community she lived in. And she was a very self-effacing kind of person, but it meant a huge amount to her to receive that coin because it was a really nice token of appreciation and validation for the hard work that she does to make her community better. So and I know a number of the other recipients, so it's good to hear and good to see.
Look, it was a no-brainer in my viewpoint to get those 70 coins minted and to be handing them out to very well-deserving recipients. I was correct when I predicted back when I announced it in the spring that the challenge would be is how do you whittle it down to the 70 sort of, for lack of better terms, most deserving. That's really not the case. It's really 70 that were sort of best substantiated, because ultimately it came down to those that substantiated. And unfortunately, there was even some that tried to send in nominations, but it was post-deadline, and I couldn't accept them because otherwise I'd still be dealing with the trying to get them all out. I think I'm down to less than 10 that still need to be presented. There's a few I'm still waiting because the coins were protected for each of the municipalities and for each of the Legion branches. So I think I'm down to maybe 3 or 4 that I'm still actually waiting on nominations from the respective municipalities or Legion branches, but that's it. And then there's a few others that we just haven't had a chance to formally present yet. But ideally, I'll get them all done here in the next month and a bit, because it would be great to get them all done in 2022. This is the Platinum Jubilee year, and unfortunately lost the Queen since they were announced, but I think they're still very deserving. And again, great. It's the funnest part of the job is actually getting out there and recognizing and seeing the impact it's having and how appreciated it is, because some of these people some of them have been recognized before because they are very involved in the community, but a lot of the nominees were people that aren't normally recognized because they're a little bit behind the scenes and they don't necessarily fit the requirement for some of the other, annual awards or awards that are handed out by chambers of commerce or municipalities, etc. The beauty of the Platinum Jubilee coin was that it was pretty wide open. You just had to sort of substantiate why you thought this person was deserving. And we had, I think the youngest was 12 years old. I know I presented to some that they're, one last week alone to Ron Newton down from the Dundalk Legion. He's 86, right? And I know I've had 90-year-olds because I presented one down in McVean or down in Hanover earlier this summer. Back in August, and she's 90. She's World War II vet. So it's I'm glad people were able to take advantage of it to nominate some very well-deserving constituents.
And we've got about 2 minutes left, so I want to ask you about your calendar that you're planning, your 2023 calendar.
Yeah, so look, it's something I've done every year since I've been elected. I try to get a calendar out there, and but the pictures in that calendar are all local photography or artwork done up by constituents. So that we put that out. People that are watching, please go to my website, alexruffmp.ca, and check out the load up your picture of your photograph, where you took it, or your artwork. And any kids out there, so some of your listeners or watchers that if they're maybe, don't have that many that watch that are maybe the school age kids that are watching Politically Speaking, but if their parents or grandparents are watching, encourage your kids to get out there. I mean, the beauty with cameras nowadays, people can take in fact, my daughter, she's 9, she's taken some phenomenal pictures with the camera, sometimes inadvertently with the phone, just if you lie it around, she likes to take pictures, but there's so much great artwork too. So at least one of the months we'll have, we'll focus on a youth that's a submission. But again, it's always, the tough part about it is is picking, because there's always more submissions than months in the year. So we do have honorable mentions. The big thing for those that are making submissions, include the month that they took the picture and the location. The more information makes it easier. So I do try to tie the photos or the artwork tied to the time of year that they were taken. Sure. And the more we got that represent right from Tobermory down to Holstein or Singhampton to Paisley, the better.
And we got to go, Alex. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We will talk again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.